All right, folks, welcome back. Week 3 of the history series. And as I said in the last video, this is really where we start to get into the meat and potatoes of American history versus North American history or America as a continent. This is where we really begin to see the seeds of revolution, the seeds of self-governance begin to play into our history. And to understand it, there are many facets, as always with anything dealing with history. You have to dig into how did society function before what we have now was created. The stepping stone for that is the British colonies, the original 13. And there were 3 types of colonies. You had a chartered colony. This is under the control of a stock company. So Connecticut and Rhode Island are great examples of this. It was very much like the East India Trading Company controlled the Caribbean and other places on the globe. It wasn't a government, it was a company. So this joint stock company in Connecticut or Rhode Island was running the entire colony. This is for trade. They would be the ones controlling who was able to get the better rates for fur or crops or anything else, and basically controlling the economy, and through that, controlling all aspects of life. You also have a proprietary colony. This is under the control of who owned the land. You have Delaware, Maryland, and Pennsylvania for this. Pennsylvania named for William Penn. Very, very much like the feudal system in England. Not much time before this happened. Basically, whoever owned the land in Delaware, Maryland, or Pennsylvania controlled everything on that land. Where were cities allowed to be built? Where were farms allowed to be placed? What could be run on those farms? All of these things, import, export, all went through the property owner. So basically the feudal lord. Finally, you have a royal colony. This is under the control of a governor appointed by British royalty. Now you have North and South Carolina, you have Georgia, and you have colonies that change types. Some of them will start royal and become chartered or proprietary, because if a proprietary colony, say the person who owns the land, dies or decides, I want to move, the British government still controls all colonies in one way or another. They can then say, no, we're not going to leave it in control of the new owner, we're sending a governor. A governor could say, well, I don't need to be here. Look at the Carolinas, very mountainous regions. Okay, so people were living primarily on the coasts at that time. You hadn't seen the westward expansion that we see later in the country's time. So the governor may return to England or contact the monarchy and say, you don't need a governor in this colony. And it may then become proprietary, or it may then become chartered. Things like this, they happen throughout the colonies, and you're really not going to see there's not a huge amount of difference, honestly, between them, other than in their formation. With a royal colony, this is the king appointing someone to run the colony, whereas with a chartered colony, it is a joint stock company that, with the permission of the king, is running the colony. So instead of one governor, you have a company. With a proprietary, it's very, very similar to chartered and royal, but it's not a company, and the governor was not appointed by the crown. It's the person who owns the land. Who do you think sold the land? The crown. It really only differs in who their loyalty is to. With a chartered company, the loyalty is to the joint stock company. If the company doesn't make money, the company goes under. Another company comes in, someone buys the land, or a governor is appointed. With a proprietary colony, if that person does not have enough children to ensure their line continues, ultimately the family may decide to sell the land. If the owner decides, I want to live somewhere else, I want to go back to Britain, the crown could sell the land again or choose, no, I'm just going to appoint a governor. With a royal colony, the governor could say, I don't need to be here. I don't want to live here. And then that could change. There wasn't a lot of it, but it does happen. So you really have three zones, three regions of the colonies. These regions you have would be New England, that would be Connecticut, Rhode Island, New Hampshire, Plymouth, Massachusetts Bay, all formed roughly between the 1620s and 1660s. You have the middle colonies, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Delaware. Again, formed roughly between the 1620s and 1680s. And finally, you have the southern colonies, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. These were formed anywhere from 1630 to 1730. So this gives you that view of expansion. You have Plymouth and Massachusetts Bay, Plymouth Rock, where the original settlers landed in 1620, and you have Georgia, the furthest south, in 1733. This is, of course, due largely at the beginning to immigration, and then from there, expansion of the population through families growing. You have single men and women who come to the colonies, you have couples who come to the colonies, entire families who come to the colonies. Single men and women are going to end up getting married and having a family. Their children will continue the process. So Plymouth and Mass Bay is not going to support everyone coming in. They're going to begin to move south. You see them move from Plymouth and Mass Bay down into New Hampshire, Rhode Island, Connecticut, ultimately down through New York, all the way to Georgia, over the course of 110 years. As with any population, though, you're going to see regional differences. It was not a picnic. You had a population explosion. You had economy to worry about. You had style of government. You had slavery as an issue where very much you were diametrically opposed on this issue. Births and immigrations, people raising their children in a new environment, they're going to be raising them in the colonies to farm or to run a business that may not even exist where they were in England or where their ancestors were in England. In the South, you pretty much see what you would expect from pre-Civil War. It was a plantation society. The South is going to be much more friendly to an agrarian society. You go into New York, yes, even still today, there are farms and ranches in upstate New York. Those are not near the size that you would find in Georgia or Tennessee or Alabama. Texas has cattle farms that are larger than some states. This is not to say that it is the only type of business happening in the South. Naturally, when you have these large plantations, you're going to have towns that spring up around them. Not as fast as in the North, by far. But you will see this when you get into Raleigh and Charlotte, Atlanta. You get into these areas where they are there because the plantation is going to need things it does not produce. If you think about current day, you go out into, we'll just say, West Texas, and you find one of these massive cattle farms. They're producing enough beef to feed the state. Where do they get their grain? Where do they get their corn? Where do they get the food, other than beef, that the people there are going to eat? Where are they going to get anything other than beef? So you're going to have economies that do spring up to provide these things. Naturally, you're going to have, for things like crops and other things that are grown, you'll have plantations that do this. I grew up in a part of Texas where, as a child, if we came into back home a certain way, we'd pass a couple of ranches. One of them a dairy farm, one of them might be raising for beef. But in this area still, we have people who are growing massive amounts of coastal hay, massive amounts of corn. We have people who are farming for lettuce and tomatoes and peas and carrots and other things. People who want to run a farm are naturally going to look at the area, especially in this time. You weren't able to ship food the way we do now. Right now, I mean, if you take out the geographical needs, say you could grow pineapple in Texas. And technically you probably could. It would just take a lot of work. Not near as easy as in a tropical area. But to get it from Texas to New York during this time probably wouldn't work too well. It only works now because they can ship from Hawaii into California for processing and canning, or ship the fruit itself from Hawaii to Texas in a matter of hours. For crying out loud, you can get from New York to Hawaii in, 13, 14 hours? So it's no stretch of the imagination to know, or to see, that all up and down the eastern seaboard, throughout the North, Middle, and Southern colonies, you're going to have people growing food to sell to people who are raising cattle, people who are fixing shoes, people who are making clothes, all of these things. It's just in the South, it's on a much larger scale. Not to mention, the textile industry is born in the colonies in the South. You can't grow cotton nearly as well in the North as in the South. It is not a food staple, so it can be shipped. And it can be shipped to clothiers in the North or shipped to clothiers in London without spoilage. In this area, of course, you have a tidewater aristocracy. These are people who have come to the South. They've taken that move to become agrarian instead of city life. Maybe they were raising animals or crops in the North or in England before they came here. Land is abundant in the South. You look at England, and there are southern states that dwarf England. So you take a farmer there, they might raise 3 or 4 head of cattle a year. And they're doing it to feed their family. And I was actually just talking to my mother, if we had our druthers, I would have enough land to raise out 2 cattle and 2 pigs a year. And in order to pay for the butcher, it would be he gets to keep 2 sides of beef and a side of pig. So I would end up with all of the meat from a cow and a pig and a half worth of meat. That's enough meat for a year for my family. So some of them are doing this. Others are setting up work as a butcher. Some of these plantations are butchering their own. The plantations themselves are run very much akin to the feudal aristocracy of not long before this in England, where the plantation owner is very much the end-all, be-all for everything that happens on that plantation. Unlike the feudal aristocracy, this is not a feudal lord in a castle with an entire city built up around him. He's only in charge on his land, but none of these none of these tidewater aristocrats want to have any one person ruling the entire colony. So they turn to elected representation, bicameral houses. Ultimately, this would become the setup for virtually every state and for the federal government of the U.S., a bicameral legislative body. That legislative body would then be beholden to their constituency. But this is still going to be either a joint stock company, a chartered company, a colony, run by the person who owns the colony, or run by a royal governor. The royal governors, or those who are governing a colony in the South, are naturally going to say, my people here are happy because they have a semblance of control. Naturally, anyone who is governing a southern colony, unless they are running a stock company that is selling the goods, they're not going to know what's going on these plantations. They're not going to know about running a cattle plantation or a cotton plantation or growing crops. So hopefully they would be willing to listen to those elected by these people who are going to have a better idea of what's going on. Yes, there is going to be the issue of slavery. As a history teacher, I cannot avoid it. At the time, Portuguese slavers are showing up on the coast, and they're bringing people they say you can purchase, and they will work for you, and you don't have to pay them. This is a concept that until people became plantation owners and people got to the colonies, it was very much foreign. There wasn't slavery to this level in the UK. There was indentured servitude, and it was equated to be that. It's just that no one was ever able to purchase the freedom. In some cases, you have plantation owners who are very lenient and others very harsh, most in between. The slaves were housed, fed, if the plantation owner was smart, cared for to a good degree so that they are able to do their job, but they are still slaves. And this is a part of history that should not be ignored, because those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. You also have this population imbalance. You look back at societies like Sparta, Rome, other places. It's honestly amazing to me that we didn't have slave revolts right and left in the South until you look at basically how the slaves were kept. When you look at Sparta, when you look at Rome, in Sparta, the slaves ran society. The men were all military men. So they weren't running anything but the government. The slaves were in charge of everything. They were actually running the homes and running businesses. They just weren't making any money. In Rome, for crying out loud, they trained them as fighters, as gladiators. Both societies were surprised when the slaves overthrew them. In the colonies, though, the slaves, even on the best plantations where they're actually cared for, they're not trained to do anything but harvest the crop or care for the animals, or cook, or clean. In some cases, their children were sold off to other plantations, but they were cared for only as much as the plantation owner needed them to be cared for to do their job. They weren't really going to be able to rise up. It's just a bad situation in history. And we need to remember it and learn from it so we don't repeat it. As we move north into the middle colonies, this is a mixed scenario, because you are going to have those middle colonies that are far enough south, they can be agrarian, but you're going to have those that are far enough north, the climate's not conducive to growing or running cattle, running livestock. So it's very much, you're going to have trade and industry, and you're going to have agrarian society. There's very little slavery in the middle colonies. It's not non-existent because you do have those people who are far enough south to run large agrarian industry. They're going to be the ones who owned the slaves in the middle colonies. It's very much a Puritan society, though. You're still run either by the property owner, the colony owner, the governor, or the stock company. But the Puritan side of it, very, very much uber conservative. You're really not going to find many societies that conservative today unless you look into the Amish or societies similar to that. But they pretty much depend just on the person running the colony. They don't really have any elected representation. What you see here is the first major difference from the South to the Middle. Is here school is mandatory for all children. Unlike in the South, where the children, as soon as they're physically old enough and able, they're helping with the animals and the crops, and they're helping run the plantation. They may actually be taking part, they may just simply be making sure the slaves do their jobs. In some scenarios, they're going to go to school and they're going to be educated, but not all, except in the middle colonies where it's mandatory. Finally, you get into the northern colonies. This is very much city life. This is trade and industry. All of these crops, from the textiles in the south to everything else produced, is a subject of trade. These are things, spices, goods, and everything going back to the old country. It is very little slavery here as well. We know that in the early days of the U.S., slavery was not non-existent in any one colony, but it's very little here. because you don't need them. You're not running these massive plantations. Yes, upstate New York you can run farms, but not nearly as well as in the South. It is a mixed population. You have those who've just arrived. You have those who've been here for a while. You have those who've moved north out of other colonies. So the value system is all over the board. Because of that, it's a mixed government. You have some royal government. You have some town assemblies. You have some town meetings. You have all of these different forms of government happening. All of this is just a ticking time bomb for something to go wrong and for something to set off that spark that basically has people saying, no, we're not going to do this anymore. The beginning of this is going to be in 1651. This is the Navigation Act of 1651. It basically says the colonies may only sell to England. Now, England is already running the show in the colonies. They're appointing the governors. They're appointing the land, or selling the land to appoint the landowner. They're authorizing the joint stock company. So in all of the governmental setups in each colony, England is at the top. What England doesn't want is the colonies deciding they can do what they want. The king very much has the entire society of England under his thumb, with himself as the ultimate rule. The colonies are far enough away that if they start realizing I can sell to France and Spain and Portugal, and I can sell to the Caribbean, and I can sell to Africa, then maybe they'll decide we don't need these governors. So the Navigation Act of 1651 says, no, you may only sell to us. We will then sell to the rest of the world. The smarter among them, of course, knew that this means if I'm selling cotton at, and we'll use modern prices, if I'm selling cotton at $100 a bushel, I know England is selling it at $500 a bushel. This is the first major example of England saying, you are my subject, not a citizen of anything, and trying to enforce their will. Of course, it leads to smuggling. It leads to the Americans finding a way to sell to France, to sell to Spain, to sell to Portugal, to sell to Italy, to sell to other countries. This, of course, is going to ultimately be found out, as it is proven here that we know about it now. It was. But this is the new identity forming. Because Britain has said, no, we are the only ones allowed to actually profit, this new identity of we're not English anymore. We live here. We're Americans. The spark happens right there. It takes a while, but it happens right there with that new identity beginning to grow in people's minds. That's where we're going to pick up next time, where we're going to look at how things go from we're just an English colony to we are Americans. And this is something you've seen in my lifetime. Hong Kong was a British territory, British colony. The British withdrew. Now, unfortunately, China decided, we can just move in. But that was a British colony and then became its own thing. This happened in my lifetime. India, very much the same. Other places. The empire that had grown to almost circumvent the globe is now shrinking back to its island. We're going to look at how this began in the Americas, starting in our next video, where we're going to look at how things began to change and what led to this rise of I'm an American, I'm not an Englishman, and how that leads to the ultimate revolution. As always, leave me your comments below. Remember to be civil. We're here to discuss, dissent, and debate, not to scream and yell like 3-year-olds in nursery school. I am never going to tell you I know everything about history. I have a bachelor's degree in it. I study it all the time. This is what I prefer to read. Yes, I am reading a ballad of songbirds and snakes. But with the exception of that, I have history book after history book after history book sitting right over here. I'll read a chapter of songbirds and snakes, then I'll go to my history books and I'll read more and more and more and more. Because that's what I love to study. That's why I'm here trying to teach it, to talk about it, and to start that conversation. as long as we're civil, the conversation leads to more learning, leads to more knowledge, because it challenges ideas, makes me go back to my reference books, and sometimes I find out, I had that wrong. Sometimes I find out, no, you're wrong, and here's more sources. As long as we're civil, I enjoy that. So please do be. As always, please remember to like and share the video to influence the algorithm and grow the channel. And remember to subscribe and turn on notifications so that you're part of the channel and you get notified every time something posts. These videos, the Classtime series, will be every Wednesday morning at 10 a.m. Central Time, U.S. Hopefully I don't have the hiccups next time. There are other videos I will be making inevitably, and those will be the ones you want notifications for. They will post whenever. Until next time, everyone have a wonderful day.